Imagine being sent into a city with a weapon that makes you more dangerous, and therefore more likely to die. Not because it malfunctions, not because it lacks firepower, but because everyone on the other side understands exactly what it means when they see it in your hands. Modern audiences are taught to associate automatic weapons with dominance, with initiative, with control. But in the middle of the 20th century in shattered European cities filled with dust, masonry, and echoes, one particular weapon quietly inverted that logic. The MP-40 was supposed to give German infantry an advantage in close combat. Instead, it often marked its carrier as the first man who would not come back. This weapon did not arrive wrapped in mythology. It came from workshops, not legends. It was not born to inspire fear in enemies, but to solve a practical problem created by the failure of old assumptions. Germany did not design the MP-40 to terrorize. It designed it to survive modern combat environments where rifles had become clumsy tools and pistols were admissions of desperation. And yet, by the time the war reached its most urban, most compressed phase, soldiers did not always welcome being issued one. That contradiction is the real subject here. Most accounts stop at the object. They catalog stamped steel parts, folding stocks, shots, rates of fire. They describe how cheaply it could be produced and how easily it could be maintained. Those facts are accurate, c'est tout, and almost completely irrelevant. What those stories leave out is the human geometry of the weapon. They leave out where its operator had to stand, how long he was expected to remain visible, and how quickly the enemy learned what eliminating him would accomplish. This is not a story about success. It is a story about what it felt like to be inside a system that mistook efficiency for safety. Once the MP-40 entered a unit, the tone of combat shifted for the man carrying it. He was no longer simply a rifleman. He became an entry point, a trigger for movement, a solution to situations that could not wait. That shift did not come with ceremony. It came with expectation. The weapon did not make him brave. It made him necessary. To understand why the MP-40 existed at all, you have to step backward into constraints rather than intentions. Germany's military planners were not imagining cinematic room-clearing assaults. They were reacting to accumulated evidence that modern combat spaces were shrinking. Streets replaced fields. Factories replaced forests. Engagement distances collapsed from hundreds of meters to tens. Bolt-action rifles were optimized for accuracy at range. In urban combat, they forced soldiers into a rhythm that no longer matched reality. Cycling a bolt after every shot was not a tactical choice. It was a delay. Pistols existed, but they lacked suppressive capacity. Light machine guns were powerful but heavy, slow to redeploy, and demanded teams rather than individuals. There were alternatives on paper. There were none that could be manufactured quickly, issued widely, and trained on efficiently under the political and industrial pressures of rearmament. The MP-40 emerged not as an innovation, but as a compromise shaped by time, resources, and doctrine. It accepted limited range in exchange for immediate volume of fire. It accepted moderate accuracy in exchange for controllability. It accepted visibility in exchange for tempo. Those trade-offs were not mistakes. They were logical within the world that produced them. Technically, the solution worked. The MP-40's simple blowback operation reduced mechanical complexity. Its relatively low rate of fire made it controllable in bursts rather than wasteful in seconds. Its folding stock allowed movement through confined spaces without constant snagging. It functioned reliably in dirt, cold, and debris, environments where theoretical elegance failed. Nothing about it was excessive. That is precisely why it spread. As the war expanded, the MP-40 stopped being an experiment and became infrastructure. It appeared wherever close combat was expected, in assault squads, reconnaissance elements, and command groups. Its presence multiplied across fronts and cities until it felt unavoidable. And this is where the first illusion collapsed, because mass adoption does not simply multiply effectiveness, it multiplies patterns. Enemies observe those patterns. They learn which soldiers behave differently, which silhouettes move forward instead of holding back, which bursts signal an advance rather than a defense. The MP-40 created a recognizable role. In urban combat, that role came with conditions that rarely appear in technical manuals. Buildings funneled movement, sound bounced unpredictably, dust obscured vision after every engagement. A soldier armed with an MP-40 was expected to push through these environments first, not out of bravery, but because the system depended on his firepower to unlock space. Every doorway required commitment. Every staircase erased distance advantages. Suppressive fire at close range demanded exposure, and exposure accumulated. Fatigue arrived faster. Ammunition loads were heavier. The psychological pressure of knowing that hesitation endangered everyone behind you did not fade with experience. It intensified. At this point, the second realization sets in. Effectiveness attracts attention, not metaphorically, physically. Blocks collapsed into each other, streets turned into trenches made of brick, and interiors became battlefields without names. What had once been urban combat on a map degraded into something closer to industrial wreckage with people inside it. And this was the environment in which the MP-40 stopped being a solution and became a verdict. Up to this point, the weapon had still been understood as a tool. Now it became a role that consumed the man assigned to it. What changes here is not technology, but density. As the war reached places like Stalingrad, the MP40 entered an environment it had been designed for, and found that design intent was not the same as survivability. Distances collapsed further, engagements became continuous. The idea of a front line dissolved into floors, basements, stairwells, and holes smashed through walls. The MP40 operator no longer advanced and halted. He advanced and remained exposed. The system had no alternative. German infantry formations were already under strain. Losses among trained non-commissioned officers meant that leadership roles were filled faster than experience could accumulate. The MP40 followed rank, not aptitude. If you were expected to make decisions under pressure, you were expected to carry the weapon that could enforce them immediately. This created a feedback loop that no one formally acknowledged. Leadership required presence. Presence required visibility. Visibility attracted fire. In theory, tactics adapted, fire and movement, bounding overwatch, supporting riflemen. In practice, the environment dismantled these ideas faster than doctrine could catch up. Walls collapsed unpredictably. Lines of sight appeared and vanished within seconds. Coordination depended on shouted orders and intuition. The MP40's automatic fire became less a means of suppression and more a signal flare announcing where the command element was located. This is where the third break in expectations occurs. Because despite everything, the weapon itself continued to perform. It did not jam catastrophically. It did not become obsolete overnight. In close quarters, it remained brutally efficient. That efficiency trapped its operators in a paradox. The better they were at their job, the faster the enemy learned how to kill them. Opposing forces adapted with precision rather than desperation. Soviet infantry units in urban environments learned to absorb initial automatic fire and counter from angles the MP40 could not dominate. Grenades, short rushes, coordinated flanking through debris. The MP40's effective range in case once an advantage, this became a ceiling. Riflemen and light machine guns began engaging from just beyond it, pinning submachine gun carriers without exposing themselves to return fire. Losses were not sudden spikes. They were steady erosion. German reports from late war urban fighting describe a recurring problem. Assault elements reaching objectives with disproportionate casualties among MP40 carriers and squad leaders. Replacements arrived quickly. The role remained empty for minutes, sometimes seconds. The weapon was passed forward again. The pattern resumed. Enemy forces adapted quickly. Defenders learned to let MP40 carriers enter deeper into structures before isolating them. Snipers prioritized the sound and behavior of automatic fire. Ambushes were structured around the assumption that the submachine gun operator would be forward, visible, and decisive. Losses followed patterns, not chance. Reports and memoirs do not describe fear of the weapon itself. They describe fear of what the weapon demanded. Being issued an MP40 often meant being reassigned to tasks with statistically worse outcomes. The weapon did not malfunction. It performed exactly as intended. And that performance concentrated risk. This was not a flaw in training. It was not cowardice. It was structural. The same logic repeated across battles. Different cities, different fronts, identical geometry. The MP40 did not cause this dynamic. It revealed it. Individual actions punctuated the pattern. Squad leaders holding corridors alone. Assault troops continuing forward because stopping meant collapse. These moments are often labeled heroic in retrospect, but the men involved describe them in simpler terms. They did what the role required. They paid what the role demanded. By the time systems began to adjust, distributing automatic fire across more soldiers, extending engagement distances, integrating combined arms more effectively, the lesson had already been absorbed by those who did not survive to articulate it. When later weapons replaced the MP40, they did not eliminate the problem. They diluted it. Risk was spread. Roles overlapped. Survivability improved not because combat became gentler, but because exposure became less concentrated. That is the real contrast between then and now. Not comfort, not lethality, margin. So return to the beginning. An automatic weapon in close quarters feels like protection. The MP40 demonstrates something colder. Sometimes the most efficient tool is the one that tells the enemy exactly who must die first. That is why soldiers hesitated when it was placed in their hands before urban combat. Not because it failed them, but because it worked, and made them visible inside a system that had not yet learned how to keep them alive.